If you had to do an internet search on nutrition, you'll find tons and tons of information, articles, and blogs that'll leave you utterly confused. From banting veganism to avoiding carbs and starches, then there's gluten-free and sugar-free movements. All of these confusing theories leave us wondering what is there actually left to eat. To chat to us more about this food confusion and its impact on our relationship with food is nutritional therapist and NLP practitioner Nikki Robertson. Welcome, Nikki. Thank you for joining us again today. So tell us about food confusion versus food phobias. I mean, you say that they are prevalent in society these days.
I think we are more confused than we've ever been about what to eat. There's, the problem with the internet is there's good information out there, but there's also a lot of unsolicited information.
Yes.
Anybody can post a blog with their opinion. And the problem is, and I was guilty of this years ago as well, is when you find a solution and it fixes you, you want to tell the world.
Absolutely, it's a great reference.
That's the thing, and you become an evangelist, and anyone can pick up a phone and video themselves nowadays and seem like an authority. And when we are desperate, we'll try anything. So there's a big problem. You've got our very evangelical vegan movement, which is all good and well, but it doesn't work for everybody. And it's very dangerous for a lot of people to cut out animal protein. It's not for everyone. So we try things ourselves, and I think we've all done that. We've all tried weird fads, and out of desperation or just curiosity, went down a road that doesn't serve us. And, well, we learn by our mistakes. So we become very, very confused about what to eat. And then we go into supermarkets and things look healthy. And they're packaged in a way that is confusing. But when you turn the packet around, there's things in there that you wouldn't have in your kitchen. So that's, again, confusing. But it looks so natural, and we've got a leaf on the box, so it must be organic. So there's a lot of assumption we make as a consumer. And, the problem is nothing really works then. So I always like to reference back, because if nowadays, things are just out of hand. What happened just post-World War II, we look at what our grandparents went through and what they were eating. So back 20, 30, maybe 50 years ago, there was very little diabetes. Almost 1 in 1,000 people were diabetic. Very little heart disease, very, very little cancer. Cancer was one of those unheard of situations. Very little obesity. Children were skinny. We were thin children,
so busy and running around.
We were busy. We didn't have to sit on a couch and sort of be sedentary. But there was very little access to fast food, pre-prepared food. We actually had to make food from scratch. And farming was a different story then. The level of pesticides, genetically modified food was non-existent. We had less choice. So
and would genetically modified foods come into that as well in terms of farming?
Yes, it would, because what happens with genetically modified foods is they're implanted with a pesticide. So they become pest resistant, fungus resistant, and that changes the microbiome, changes the gut. And that changes how the body works as a whole, changes how much serotonin and dopamine and all those neurotransmitters we make. So if we go back and think about how simple life was 50 years ago, if you're looking to change the way you eat, we've got to simplify and got to do a lot from scratch. And for a lot of people, that's tough, because we're not conditioned, we're not taught to cook, we're not taught to plan, we're not taught to prepare. But generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, to be phobic of a food group is a big problem, because you're not only losing out on nutrients, you're losing out on just about everything that food does for the body, and the human body needs everything.
How do we identify somebody who's actually got a legitimate phobia of food? What is the reaction of that phobia? How does it manifest?
What I see in the practice is somebody comes to me with a really predefined set of ideas about how to eat, and they tell me what they've been cutting out and nothing's working, they're not losing weight, or they're not gaining weight, or they're feeling terribly tired, but they're terrified of eating carbs in case they get fat. Those kind of words. And I see it a hell of a lot with people who've had bariatric surgery and they've lost a lot of weight, and they're so scared of putting it back that they go to extremes. They over-exercise. They cut out whole food groups. They don't touch anything with sugar in it. And it leads to it's an unhappiness. It's, you can't relax and then just enjoy yourself and embrace food.
Pleasurable.
Food is our first experience of nurturing. It's how we bond to people. It defines the quality of our relationships. Social eating is part of the tribe.
It's festive.
It's indicative of In fact, all the healthiest countries in the world, in Europe, the Mediterranean countries, it's all about food, but it's about social interaction with food. So when we start going, I can't do this and I can't eat that, you sort of exclude yourself from being able to interact with people in your life. And it becomes a big problem.
Do you think that the changing social nature of our world also has an impact on that? I mean, it's not as if, as in olden day times, you would sit down at the dining room table every day and you'll have a meal with family and you'll discuss. So a lot of that talk it out process comes in as part of that.
You know, the quality of our lives is very largely linked to the quality of our relationships. And even if you live in a loud family who fight with each other over the dinner table, it is an unpacking process. It is about the social interactivity that is healthy for your brain. And that's what's missing, and it's becoming increasingly a big problem nowadays because we're mindless eaters. So back to basics, back to eating everything as healthily as possible, whole food. I'm not saying everything as in ice cream and pizza every day, but real food, you know, food that's grown in the ground.
Absolutely.
You know, and making a social point of interacting with people.
Let's go back to food-specific fears and phobias. I mean, you mentioned people afraid of carbs, people afraid of sugars, people afraid of various particular things. I mean, when does it get to the point of, so anorexia is a body dysmorphic disorder, but is also based on a fear of food or any food, let alone the wrong food. It's just, I'm scared to eat because I'm going to put on some weight.
Yes, very often people with a mental issue around food don't see the issue, they don't see the problem. It's a distortion, it's exactly what it is. But yes, there is, a lot of these are built on phobias of getting fat or not being socially acceptable. And then you go along and we're told to cut out carbs. So people get really scared of eating certain foods and they create all sorts of anxieties, real anxieties around real food. But what happens is a backlash. Eventually your brain just goes, I can't do this anymore, and they binge. And then that creates bulimia and all sorts of other coping mechanisms. I mean, drinking alcohol is a prime example. Hold back and hold back and hold back, and then it just...
And you binge on the weekend.
Then you go crazy. And that's more damaging than having a half a glass of wine every night if that's what you really feel like doing. So we've got to look at, you know, if it's creating a fear, we've got to deal with that. You know, we shouldn't be scared of eating.
How do you deal with that? I mean, if you've got somebody who's dead scared of a potato, how do you get people to sort of re-engage with food again so that they can manage those phobias and bring back that balance into their diet?
Sure. So I like to deal with facts. I like to measure a person's body fat muscle ratio, their hydration, and actually look at numbers. We look at blood tests and things, so we get facts to take away the fantasy. So if we can take the fantasy out of the mind and put a level of control, that person's got a little bit of control of what's going on biologically, and they can see a difference and we can measure a difference, we could say, just pause that. I'm asking you to pause that phobia just for, give me a month. And let's see what happens. If you can just pause it long enough to prove to you that eating real food, and it's tough to do this if you're not used to it, will actually benefit you, we can overcome that phobia. But I think, and I know for myself, it took decades to stop worrying about these things. A good example is fats. You know, with the whole high fat movement, people are still very worried about cholesterol, even though it's got nothing to do with dietary fats. These ideas and fears will live in our brains for years before we practice eating them and seeing nothing's going wrong.
Absolutely. So what are some of the food principles that we should be following to make sure or to prevent these phobias of foods? Are there, I mean, we know about 5 a day, that was one thing, and you know, a colourful plate. You mentioned real foods, whole foods. What are some, if you had to put it in a nutshell of a principle, what would that be?
Okay. So I would say in every meal you need proteins and carbohydrates. And what I mean by that is I tend to go towards animal protein. You can certainly do it vegetarian. But in every meal you need proteins and carbs because proteins balance the glycemic index of every carbohydrate. So if you had to have pure sugar, pure glucose, but combine it with protein, that glycemic index would drop. Irrespective. It might not be good for you. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but you'll see
it brings it in check.
It brings it in check. So we need proteins and carbohydrates, whatever you can afford. So it's not to say go and eat salmon every day, because that's just out of most people's level of reality. So if sardines and pilchards are what you can afford, this is a really good form of food. And then we want to add our green vegetables and our fats, our healthy fats. So you should have 4 elements on your plate. It's not always possible. For a lot of people, it's just
Yeah.
not doable. But try and aim for that.
Okay.
And there's lots of ways around that. Even if you're on a tight budget, if you've got a family, it doesn't have to be fancy and expensive. You can also grow a lot of your own
Yes,
foods.
absolutely.
You know, there's also the thinking, if I can't go organic, I'm not even going to think about it. I'm going to just stick with the takeouts. It's like, you don't need to go 100% organic.
Yeah.
Even if it's 20%, you can, you know, just add in herbs into what you're cooking. It'll make a massive difference in your life.
It really is just about making the best choices that you can with the means that you've got.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
wonderful.
Don't let cost or capability put you off. The smallest changes lead to the next step and the next step. And before you know it, you're so much better.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, let's hope that everyone gets it right and we can avoid these phobias, because it is a bit of a dramatic thing to have to deal with in life, and
Scary.
it's unnecessary, I
It's
think.
scary.
if
We've got
you can-
enough stress to deal with. Don't
Absolutely.
be scared of food.
Absolutely. Nikki, thank you so much for joining us. Always an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.